Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friend, it is going very well. We are back on Awesome Truth, and today we are talking about a documentary, Walt, a pretty prominent documentary, I'd say, on the heels of the Cody Rhodes documentary that we talked about pretty recently. It seems like WWE and Peacock are sort of highlighting, well-made, high-level, quote-unquote, real documentaries these days, with a little more production value behind them and maybe some thought and some detail. And this is one they're promoting very heavily. It just came out recently. I think it came out in April 1st. Yeah, April 1st this came out, so Mania season. And it's called Bray Wyatt, Becoming Immortal. And it's basically the story of Bray Wyatt, who is someone, Walt, that we've talked about a little bit on the show, but really not a ton.
Yeah, and obviously this was a very, very deep dive into this guy's life and
2
career.
hours, feature length.
Very deep dive. It was very refreshing. I don't know if you agree with this, but it was refreshing to document someone of recent history, WWE history. I guess with the Cody Rhodes too, but just getting stories and revisiting stuff from 10 years ago as if it's historic. It's kind of nice because it's not Attitude Era. It's not ruthless aggression. It's not vintage 80s and new attitude or new era stuff. It's it feels uncharted or just not as, I guess, not as it feels more fertile land to kind of dissect and look at in a different way. So from that perspective, I thought it was kind of refreshing to some degree.
Yeah, no. I mean, Bray is one of obviously the most prominent wrestlers of the last decade or so. But as you said, even before, his run as Bray Wyatt, he was involved in FCW. He was involved in, NXT. He was involved in, the Nexus. He was in a whole bunch of things that feel recent-ish, I think, but they are also 15 years old now, are very, very old. And there's a way in wrestling just feels like the Attitude Era in some ways feels like it happened, a decade ago. The Attitude Era is what, 30 years old now? The Attitude Era is very old. It's the things these, maybe not 30, 25. It happened a long time ago. It's just there's a weird way I think of thinking about time when it comes to wrestling. I just don't think about that as that long ago. And like you said, the NXT, the initial NXT era, the FCW era, those are history. Those are recent history. But that's an era that is bygone. But it's nice to revisit it and give it the sort of the import in the conversation. In part because it's unique, and in part because it's not the same shit we've heard about 8 million times before.
Yeah, and also too, it's just this era of specifically WWE, but also just wrestling in general, where there's just a camera on at all times. There's a camera every day with every person doing something, and so there's so much. I understand why they go 2 hours with this thing, because they just had so much to work with, in addition to a lot of original filming and a lot of just peeling back a lot of the process with how Bray created things. He had a go-to costume guy, and he has just endless creatives working with him on these characters and these ideas and these scribbles, and and then watching that unfold in front of a camera with Triple H in the room and with these important stakeholders, and everything's super documented. So it could have just went on and on if they wanted to. I'm glad they didn't, but just so much to work with.
Yeah, you make a very good point. I haven't really thought about that, but it's extremely true. These guys live their lives on camera, especially wrestlers of this era. Most people these days, to a certain extent, are pretty well documented in the last couple decades. But wrestlers, everything they did, promo classes, coming up in the minors, working your way into the big leagues, all of these things are on film. Your voice, your face, your everything you do. And Bray is one of those characters, one of those people, Windham Rotunda, who sort of embodied all that because he was so big and so important and so unique, And one thing I'll say about this documentary, we can dive into whether it was successful or good objectively or all those things. But I think one thing is, that I did like without a doubt is it did really try and and capture why he was so special, which is, I think that's a word I would use to describe Bray Wyatt is. I don't know that the company used him very well. I don't know that he ever reached his potential in terms of maybe what he could have been as a character, as a wrestler, etc. But it was a moment in time where you're like, I've never seen a guy like this, or at least the guys like this come around so infrequently, and what he's doing isn't necessarily that much different than we have seen before, but the way he's doing it and the time in which he's doing it and the manner, like it was just there was this like lightning in a bottle type thing with him where you're just like, this stands out, like I must watch this and I want to see what this guy's going to do next, even if it doesn't end up as good as it could be. Like I still want to see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, just the Bray Wyatt character and execution in general. It's like the crazy meanderings of like cult leading hillbilly, like Jake Roberts style delivery meets like Undertaker, like the original incarnation of Bray, where it was just a madman ranting and just like a crazy person who's like compelled by just like craziness, but like there was such a devotion and such a like earnestness to him doing it. It's not one of those things where it's like, oh, the Undertaker is such a ridiculously stupid gimmick, and we kind of just all eventually just like we just eventually just decided this was super iconic. Like for me, it's hard to obviously it's for many people it's hard to like not create parallels, but like the Bray character and execution, I think were like only he could make that character, but also like the character was a perfect platform for him to just be as eccentric and detailed and just like kind of like visceral as possible. So it kind of worked both ways in that regard.
And I think you're right, and it reminds me of something that I think about a lot when in terms of wrestling, and I don't think this comes to the forefront a lot, and nor should it, because it's a little in the weeds. But like a big part of wrestling, obviously, is the literal wrestling element, getting into the wrestling ring and fighting another guy or girl and trying to beat them in a match. So I think a core element of a character, or what should be a core element of a character, is like, why would this person want to wrestle? Like why would this person
Right.
want to be employed by WWE and pursue championships? Like why? Obviously, with Undertaker, that doesn't really make any sense. But it eventually didn't matter because he's Undertaker. With the original Bray, why I like original Bray so much is just what you're just saying. Like he was a crazy, angry, loud guy who seemed psychotic and deranged and wanted attention and wanted people to follow him and wanted to beat people up. And you're like, that's easy to grasp, like it was complicated and rich and deep, but you're also like, of course this guy would wrestle. Like of course he wants to fight. Like it just makes very logical sense. And I think that's a great part of original Bray, and it's something that is very lost with the evolution of the Bray Wyatt character from there.
Well, let's start with this question. Well, not start, but like let's pivot to this question. I should say is like, do you think Windham Rotunda was a good wrestler?
Yes, for sure. I think taking into account all the things that involve being in a ring, the little things, the faces you make, the motions and all that. I'm reminded of the famous thing, at least internet famous, of when him and Roman Reigns teamed up that one night in that tag match, as you may recall, on Raw, and he does the point and Roman spears, I think Sheamus or Del Rio, whoever it was, to stop him from the pin. Like little things like that, Windham Rotunda was incredible at. And I think I wish there had been more of that later in his career as opposed to the route that he took.
I mean, I think pairing him in programs with Daniel Bryan and with then the Wyatt family, the Shield, like, you have to be a good wrestler to make those feuds like iconic the way they were, and to me still are. I mean, I don't know. The stock didn't really dive into it.
He's an underrated part. I didn't even think about Bryan. He is one of the main things that helped make the Yes Movement a real thing. Like he was the feud that turned Bryan into a superstar. In a lot of ways,
one could argue, yeah, because like that was like the big feud Daniel Bryan had before WrestleMania 30.
Yeah.
with him on the cage and
Yeah, which
join
is
the Wyatts.
a top, a top Raw moment for me for sure. But if there are such things as top Raw moments,
Right,
it's on
yeah.
the list.
It's a short list. It's a very short list.
I mean,
Um,
to take aside real quick, that is what this documentary talks very, very little about all of those specifics, and I get that it's not about it's I guess it's one of the pitfalls of doing one of these style documentaries is you talk about a wrestler without talking about the things he did in wrestling sometimes, and you sort of lose the thread on what this guy was actually good at and what made him so special.
yeah, I mean, I would have loved at least a few minutes on those things because those were like truly iconic. And when you mentioned like the Roman tag match against what was that?
It had to be. It was definitely
Foreign
it was some League of Nations style.
League of Nations. That's what they were
Yeah.
called. Um, you know, I think for me, an unexplored thing that just for some reason never came to fruition was like the Bray Wyatt face movement, where the people are cheering him and he's not really changing, but like you're supposed to get behind him and you're not supposed to like hate him or like cheer against like root against him. And they never really pulled the trigger. And I feel like who knows what could have happened from that because he was getting the loudest cheers in the arena certain like at that time. And
Even the night he came back, that they Extreme Rules, they make a point of saying how big the pop was, and then to the best of my recollection, and certainly based on this documentary tells you, he just becomes like a scary monster guy who's fighting LA Knight, and it's like
yeah.
you just ended a pay-per-view with the return of a megastar and got incredibly huge cheers. If there's ever a time to pull the trigger on him being a good guy, that was probably it too.
Yeah, I don't understand why they wouldn't just like let that cook. But all this is to say, with regards related to him as a wrestler, it's just sad that like he couldn't just continue as Bray Wyatt and he couldn't just like or Windham Rotunda and instead just like get shackled by these like I know like this part of it was his idea was like the Fiend and the Firefly Funhouse moments were pretty like very memorable, but like those Fiend matches are not good wrestling. It's just, and I mean, I don't, what a hot take, but like and it's just sad because he was a good wrestler and good in ring, and you just like completely handicapped everything about him that made him worth cheering. Like why during the Bray Wyatt era, like this guy had like so many iconic little things, like sayings, people singing, the Fireflies, like so much of his presentation people were into and remember fondly. It's like now let's just like strip all of this and like okay, well,
Well,
but you got the feed.
you sort of touch on something that I think is needs to be talked about in regards to this documentary, and that's obviously Bray Wyatt passed away about a year ago, and so this is a documentary about his life with his family involved, and it gets very emotional at the end, and it's I don't manipulative is a strong word because I think it's all very genuine. And when Bo Dallas and Taylor is crying, I'm tearing up with them. I'm like, I understand losing a brother must be horrifying, and I couldn't imagine going through what they're going through. And I appreciate what he's talking about, and I believe everything he's saying with 100% sincerity. That said, this is a WWE production, and they are tugging at your heartstrings on purpose, and they are telling the story of Bray Wyatt through the lens of after he passed, let's look back at his career and let's, focus on the things we want to focus on. And obviously let's not self-critique ourselves. Let's not question the choices we made with this character. Let's certainly not just besmirch him at all. And I don't blame them. I don't want them to dig dirt on him. I'm not trying to muckrake. I don't want them to do anything negative to his, he has a good legacy and he was a great wrestler and he deserves to be remembered as such. But as they're telling this story, as they're going through his career, I can't help but think, one of the things they touch on is how exciting Bray was to be at WrestleMania. I'm at WrestleMania. This is amazing. It's a dream. Like my dad and, and my uncle, and now I'm here, and this is so great. Bray Wyatt goes to WrestleMania, loses to John Cena. Bray Wyatt goes to WrestleMania, loses the Undertaker. Bray Wyatt goes to WrestleMania, gets emasculated by The Rock. Bray Wyatt goes to WrestleMania, loses to Randy Orton. Like, this is just not that you're not that there's not value in losing, and not that he wasn't still a big name and a big character, but like, to me, when I watch the documentary, I'm like, we are understandably glossing over how many fumbles there were with this guy. And maybe he was self-defeating in a lot of ways. Like you said, maybe there was, pushes for him to be a baby at certain points and to be a good guy, and he kiboshed it. He wanted to be the Fiend. He wanted to do this. He wanted to do that. He did sound like a complicated man. But I just can't help but think, like, man, there's so much potential here that it was wasted along the way. And I don't know who's to blame, and it doesn't really matter. But that's just all I can think about watching the wrestling parts of this documentary and being like, man, this guy could have been so much bigger. And for whatever reason, it just never really happened, and it's a shame to see that.
Yeah, I mean, to touch on the first point, super fucking sad.
Yeah, horrible.
It was super sad.
The worst thing, like young and just had so many kids, and like it's horrifying. And like that's why it's hard to talk about this objectively from that regard, because like I don't want to sound crass or insulting to the man's family and his legacy. But I still think you can talk about WWE productions that way. Like they made it with a certain thing in mind. Like they're trying to pitch a certain angle. I feel like we're allowed to come back at them and say, this feels a little,
So you feel it's exploitive for them to kind of talk about
a little bit. It's a strong word, but I don't know another word to use to describe, what they're sort of going for.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I would not. If that's how you feel, I would not say you're wrong to feel that way. But for me, when you talk about the regret of this guy's career and like what could have been and why, like what was left on the table before he tragically passed away, it's because we feel a certain way about this guy, and we all can kind of tell he was like, a talented, creative guy. And also, like, you watch this documentary, it's like all these people like cared and loved him, and his ex-wife is on with the mother of his first set of children. It's like there's no bad blood there, and there's all these like pictures and videos of him with, like with fans, interacting with the fans, and like seemed like a kind of a sweet, nice guy. And it's like, I feel like a lot of this is like part of the reason I'm like, man, they really botched him is also because like it's like at the end of the day, as a fan, I also kind of like him as a person, and then watching like how much he impacted people, like watching Braun Strowman like break down and cry. It's like, it's like the same way you like people talk about Owen Hart when he passed away, and it's just like how awful it was because everybody regarded this guy as like a really great human at the end of the day. And so it might be icky, but like it's also part of the story, and it's also like important to remember that like he's a really great person, even if maybe he disagreed with creative or he was difficult. It's like, he was there for fans, he was there for his family, he was there for his friends, he mentored a lot of people. He's an extremely creative person in this industry full of scumbags. And like, so like that's why I feel that way for the most part. And so if I don't look at it as like they're making me feel this way, it's more like this is objectively like he's really sad, and as a result, like we've lost a great human and wrestler.
Yeah,
which is not something you say often.
No, it is not. Like you said, especially about wrestler in particular. And you're right. And there's no rule that when you make a documentary about a wrestler that it has to like. And we certainly have critiqued many on this show that take the time to go granularly through matches and a career, and then he did this at SummerSlam, and then he did this at Rumble. And like, no one wants that. Obviously, I would much prefer this to that in almost every single circumstance. And I also don't expect this to like I said, to self nitpick, how they handled the guy and his career and his personality. Like that's obviously that's just not something I would expect them to do. So to critique them for doing it, but also knowing that they would never in a million years do something like that would seem silly. It seems like a waste of time. So I totally understand that, and I appreciate that it's clearly had value to the family and value to telling Bray's story, and I'm sure they signed off on it, and I'm sure, like you said, the emotion that all the family members share and the wrestlers share is very genuine, and you can tell that he meant so much to them, and I just can't help but wonder, it's to step back and to be somewhat myopic about it. I don't like. I wonder what would have happened next. Like I wonder if they ever would have found footing with the guy, because he was so good and big for what he was. He was like, even though, like we said, like I prefer the initial incarnations. I think that works better in the dynamic of pro wrestling, and I think it made a lot of sense and led to his best matches and best character moments and best wrestling moments overall. But I wonder what would have happened with him, just because I don't know, like it doesn't seem like a guy who is built on longevity, like again, speaking objectively about that, watching a guy go on Raw and SmackDown and cut some of the promos he would cut, you're like, this is great stuff. Like this is just so much better than like people going out there and saying, I'm gonna beat you in the ring on Monday or whatever. But you're also like, how can you do this 2 shows a week, 52 weeks a year, years and years and years? Like this just does not seem like a sustainable idea. Like it's so hard to bring that kind of fire and intensity and intelligence and thought to wrestling, like it feels like there's a chasm there, between what Bray Wyatt what Windham Rotunda was trying to accomplish as a wrestling character and like what is demanded of professional wrestlers, day in and day out.
Yeah, I mean, longevity wise, from a creative perspective, it just becomes there does become a like hill you can climb at times. Like the Undertaker is a good example, where it's just like it's the same act, it's the same fucking act, and it's been so long, but here we are. We're still super amped about it. He was just at WrestleMania, this guy doing the same gong and choke slam, everything. I mean, John Cena is another one where it's like the act has gone on so long, and you're like, when is this going to change? And
he's
it never
still wearing
does.
jorts, and you're like, he's like 45, and he's a famous actor now.
And at this point, no, I don't think anyone's even upset about it. No one's even like, I want to see John Cena too. It was like, no one's even saying that. Who's saying that? and it's funny because Bray Wyatt, famously in that Firefly Funhouse match, completely trolled that. That whole idea of why didn't he turn heel and why didn't John Cena do that? But like ultimately though, if you do something that's pretty good to great for long enough, and you do slight pivots and slight turns, like Randy Orton, like I could name you a lot of people who just keep doing their thing, and there's a new rising star. You pair him with Matt Riddle, and suddenly it's like kind of new, but it's still like the same, and it
reminds me, there was talk recently that they came to Orton and they were like, Orton, we should update your theme music, and everyone was like, why would you ever do that? Like, why? Even though it makes no sense now, why? Like, how can you take that away? For what gain?
Right. But if you have something that works too, like, yeah, don't fix what ain't broken just to do something new. Like, do something new if Bray Wyatt wasn't working, but like there was no well, I don't want to say there was no evidence that it wasn't working. I think through a series of weird booking decisions, like with like the bugs in the ring and shit like that, it's just like, yeah, maybe you switch it up because like it wasn't as good as it was before. But it's like, well, you had something pretty good before though.
There's the specter of Vince on this documentary, who is never brought up, and understandably so, given the state of the company right now. But it's you do wonder, like, man, if maybe H had control of this guy's career for a decade and not Vince, like maybe
Yeah.
would there have been a more Undertaker style idea there? You know, like would they have stopped jerking him around so much along the way? When maybe, like you said, maybe there was just let him kick back and do his thing, like limit him a little more. Like maybe he doesn't need to fight every week. Maybe he does become more of an attraction. But like, and let him do his creative, unique thing when it's called upon and necessary, as opposed to entering him into feud after feud after feud, where you're just like, that's just not the way this guy's built. That's not that's not the value he brings to the company.
Right. Well, I mean, one thing to note is like Triple H didn't invent this gimmick, but it was under his roof that this guy's career started, really. Because the original idea before he went to NXT and reinvented himself and was allowed to kind of like express his creative, like, new character was Husky Harris. And I don't know whose idea that was, but
whose gimmick was apparently, I'm a big old fat guy. And
cool. Yeah, we know that works out well at the end.
A very Vince style thing, though. Like, you're
right.
slightly larger than other guys. I'm going to make you a fat guy.
Yeah, right. Then again, you know, NXT also crowned Bo Dallas as their champion way back when. So, you know.
Yes. It wasn't all home
maybe
runs. There were some singles and some strikeouts to go with those home runs.
But to that nice pivot into a big part of this doc and a part of Bray Wyatt's career that I certainly had no visibility on was his latest run with like Uncle Howdy, and Bo, I guess, was back. I didn't even realize Bo was back.
Me neither.
I had no idea. And so my question to you is, where do we go from here? Is there life in WWE in this IP with Bo? Is Bo worth the investment of trying something?
I mean, as we're recording this, which is a few days before it comes out, we should note there's been speculation for certainly since this doc came out a month and a half ago, but even before that they were going to do something with Bo, with maybe Eric Rowan coming back, with maybe Nikki Cross, with Dexter Lumis. Like, there's all this conversation about all these random people possibly being in some sort of stable, Wyatt-inspired, unclear. But if you watch this documentary, there's certainly a strong implication that Bo is going to do something. It literally ends with sort of like a Marvel Studios style teaser of, something happening with Uncle Howdy, which again, I didn't know Uncle Howdy was a real thing. I knew that was like part of Bray's character, lineup or whatever, but I did not know that Bo Dallas was playing him on wrestling shows for apparently a couple months before Bray was off and then ultimately passed. So I hate to get into, I hope Bo gets a run, because he given everything that's happened, I'd be curious to see him take up that mantle, I guess. But it would probably be mostly out of curiosity. Like, I don't think Bray Wyatt as an IP is, which is a good way to describe probably the way they're going to use it. I think he's a singular presence. I think he is a special human being who, the character and the man playing him, I don't think you can extrapolate that out to a bunch of other lesser performers, to be honest, and say, hey, can you all just be Bray-esque, Can you go out there and do Bray kind of stuff? Like, I don't understand how that's going to work. I guess take a crack at it. Like I said, H is in charge now. Like, I trust him to figure it out more than Vince, certainly. Mm-hmm. But I don't think Bo Dallas is a main event style wrestler with a main event style personality or a main event style in the ring. And like, hate to say that, like, I wouldn't mind the guy collecting a paycheck, get that bag, Bo, like, get that job, come back on board, for whatever reason, who cares? But I will not be tuning in to see what Bo Dallas as Uncle Howdy is doing on a week by week basis.
Yeah. I mean, I think Bray worked because of Windham Rotunda.
Yeah.
But let's see what Bo's got. I mean, like, let's be honest, Bo was never really given a fair shot at anything.
I mean, I like Bo Leave as like a I don't know how many legs that had, but I bought a Bo Leave shirt. I have a Bo Leave coffee mug. So like, I've contributed some money to Bo Dallas's career as a wrestler.
But he was a main event NXT person, and then was never billed in any way significant in the main roster. It became part of the B team or the B list or the
whatever that was. with
Yeah, I
Curtis
mean,
Axel.
Curtis Axel. So I don't know. Well, let's. I mean, I'm all for giving him a fair shot at something that could work. I just don't know if this is gonna work, and it's not even anything against him. It just like feels like a gimmick on a gimmick on a gimmick, and that's such a uphill battle. But maybe they have a better idea. Maybe with different direction, or like maybe it just changes a little bit. Maybe it's not this just a complete like remake of an old classic. Maybe they go in a different direction, and in which case, then like let's see where this goes. I don't know.
I mean, we talked about it a little bit already, but like, and it's something Triple H talks about in the documentary, and it's implied that this is an issue with Bray, and I think would be an issue with whatever this stable ends up being. And wrestling, there's a portion of wrestling that has to involve wrestling, and it does not make sense for a supernatural monster in a mask who can't be killed to fight Seth Rollins in a wrestling match. Like that doesn't hold together. And a lot of what Bray was doing at a certain point was fascinating, but it wasn't wrestling. You're like, I get what they're like. I hope the Firefly Funhouse, like you said, it was certainly intriguing, and it led to that great Cena cinematic match. But other than that, I was like, how do you get this into the squared circle at one point? And it was very hard to do, I think, for everybody involved. If this Wyatt family thing, extended Wyatt family happens, who's the face of it, and who does the wrestling? Like, does Bo Dallas get into the main event? Like, there's a world where that happens, I guess, but there's a lot of things that need to fall into place before that makes any sort of sense. And I think that's just the problem with all this. Like, sure, like maybe you're gonna sell some if the new Wyatt family T-shirts. Like, I could see those selling like hotcakes. But at a certain point, Dexter Loomis has to have a wrestling match. Nikki Cross has to have a wrestling match. Like that just feels like it's gonna be the pitfall with all this.
Yeah, I mean, they should not be hot shotted to the. Let's just start with.
But what do you
Jey
do
Uso.
with them if they're not in like? If they have Bray's the name and they're just like fighting versus like I don't like what is the outcome if they're not important right away?
Well, at least give it time to develop. And does the audience like it? If they do, what parts? Okay, well, this didn't work. How can we like shooting them up the roster doesn't make sense to me at this point because we don't even know what it is. So let's have a mid-card Jey Uso match. Let's find out. Do people like this? Where are the gaps? Who's doing the wrestling? Let's figure that part out. Maybe it's not Dexter Loomis right away. I don't know. Maybe Nikki Cross was always fine in the ring, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know.
It just feels like one of those things, though, where like, and again, this is a lot of this is internet hype. Like a lot of this is things I've read on, but it also seems like a thing that is going to happen inevitably in some form. I just wonder, like, are they going to plan for this and like get a bunch of costumes and a bunch of masks and like some theme songs and some lighting and like at that point, can you do all that and then they're facing, Sheamus on SmackDown? Like, why? Not that there's any shame in facing Sheamus, but like, if you're putting all that work into it, do you then just slow burn it too? Like, maybe they will. You're right that it probably is the right call, but I just have an inkling. I'm like, they're gonna put a lot of effort into this, and they're gonna expect it to hit, and I just don't think it hits without Windham Rotunda.
Probably not, but give it the best shot with the available people, and let's see if it's genetic, I mean, like,
I hope he doesn't feel the pressure. It seems like he feels the pressure to like carry on the legacy. That seems like a lot to have on his shoulders. Like, I hope he's just saying that in the heat of the moment because he's his own man. He doesn't have to be Bray Wyatt. Like, everybody admits that Bray Wyatt was, a man apart from the world. Like, no one is going to do this again.
Yeah, right. And I think that's probably the thing that's going to really screw this is like the expectation that this is going to be the same. It's like it's not the same already. It's not the same. So like let's make it something different, or let's just go the fuck home.
Yeah, we can just not do it. That's all. That is an option, and we'll probably end up there in a few weeks, unfortunately, for the people involved. But one thing I will say about this documentary, I don't think it was the best thing they've ever done. But like I said, I appreciate the slickness and the quality to it. I appreciate them to a certain extent trying to make it more palatable for, mainstreamy, even though I don't think mainstream people are going to watch the Bray Wyatt documentary. But I think they're trying to not like lean too hard on, like I said, the match by match sort of boring wrestling dynamic to it all. But even at the same time, even though they didn't show me the things I wanted to see about the Wyatts versus the Shield and Daniel Bryan and all those guys, it did make me think like we should do a couple more good Bray matches on like watch-alongs, because some of them are genuinely great and there's so many good moments. And I get bogged down with the things that didn't work a little bit, as I've stated on this show, but I would like to remember the things that were great, because there were really some transcendent things that he did beyond just interviews and beyond just the promise and potential. They hit on a lot of the stuff and it really worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think the presentation was great. The uncovered footage they pulled out was great. I think they did a good job of making me care about Bray Wyatt and how this loss was so impactful. And I don't know. I feel they did a good job. But maybe they could have come at his career differently. You can nitpick it, but ultimately, like, it's pretty emotional watch.
Remember that great moment where the Wyatt family and Shield are just, I think, standing on opposite sides of the ring, and they slowly get up on the ring apron, and the fans are losing their minds. Like, I just think that could have been a great example to say, like, this guy, he was one of 6 in that match, but like he was arguably at that time the most important of the 6 people in that match, and he got the fans to go crazy from people standing on a ring apron, and that wasn't him cutting a promo, that wasn't him coming up with some wacky character, that was him understanding the tenets of wrestling, That was him understanding that building enthusiasm and excitement it can be done in very subtle ways. And I think that is the core of what I really liked about him as a performer. Not that he was being all wacky or wearing, a scary mask.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like, you and I find those moments really fun. So look back on those moments really fondly, and, this guy had 3 other pivots in the character's like lifespan. It's like, I guess, we can't sit too long on Bray Wyatt, which was, obviously the best part. So
yeah,
sad.
Yeah,
sad
it is.
It
is sad, and it's sad that it's sad to it's a horrible story. Anyone dying that young is a tragedy, and especially with all the outpouring of support, like seeing what Becky Lynch, like I appreciate Becky Lynch put it really well. Like, she wasn't in it a ton, but like when she was in it, she was like, Windham Rotunda was amazing person, like she was just being so blunt and so direct. Like, this guy was remarkable, hard stop. I'm not gonna like tell you a bunch of stories, and I'm just here's like, or at least the parts they used of her, it just really hit home to me. I was like, just these people, just everyone is crying, and like everyone said at the end too, it's something I really found fascinating, is just we can barely believe that it really happened, which is sort of how I feel too, and I think how a lot of people feel. Like, it just feels like, because he was such a supernatural, interesting character, it feels like he might just come back to life one day, like, gotcha, which is obviously not true. He's very not alive, and it makes it very sad. But it just shows the persona he cultivated around himself, and publicly what we all know of him is there was just this sense that, like, even if it wasn't always what it could be, anything truly could happen, and he was transcending the form in a lot of ways, and that still continues even after he's dead. Like, everything still feels unpredictable and wild in a way that you really can't ascribe to many other people in this business. So
yeah, well put.
Yeah. Well,
nothing else to add to that.
Yeah. There you go. Well, if you want to learn more about Bray Wyatt or watch a sad, long documentary on his life, which is a lot of emotion and a lot of good stuff, Bray Wyatt Becoming Immortal is on Peacock. And like I said, I think we'll do some good Bray Wyatt. Did we do the Hell in a Cell with Seth? We never did that, did we?
Oh, God, no.
Okay.
Why would we do that?
Well, I was thinking we could do it, before he passed, we could have done it to clown on how bad it was. But obviously now that he's not alive, we will just do the stuff that was good.
Yeah, we'll do the Shield dive one. That was fire.
Let's do the incredible matches that we love very much.
Yeah. So.
Well, we'll see. We'll add those to the list. And again, if you want to hear us talk more about bunch of people in this documentary, we talk about Bray a little bit on a couple episodes, but episodes in general, all of them are available on our archives, awesometruth.libsyn.com. You can also subscribe to us, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere podcasts are delivered, we are there. Subscribe, rate, review, all that good stuff, and get all the awesome truth you can handle. Walt, great to talk Bray with you, great to talk documentaries. we're still plugging away on that Becky Lynch book. Speaking of Becky, so
Boy.
that's going to come soon, right?
Maybe before summer.
I have officially started reading it, so that's good.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
So I'm a good reader, so we'll get to it real soon.
Oh crap! That means I have to pick it up. Pick up the kids.
Not like tomorrow soon, but we'll just like you said, the summer. It's basically summer, and we'll put that on that'll be coming very soon. So if you want to read a book along with us, the Becky Lynch book, I hear it's great. I was looking at it; people love it apparently. So
far, it's so good.
That's good. We love a good book. There's not a ton of them, so I'm very happy it's good.
The conceit of the podcast. It's reading books.
Used to be at one point.
Yeah. We'll get back one day.
That's right. Thank you all for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.